a couple of weeks ago I talked about Job, and we talked about how that he had lost everything that he had except for his wife, and that was all because that God allowed Satan to challenge him, and then God allowed Satan to challenge him again, and that was having Job break out in boils that were just horrible. And one thing that stood out to me in that, and I mentioned it last time, it said that he was basically, well, my visualization of it, is he was sitting there and he was scraping himself with a broken piece of pottery, which I assume was pretty sharp. And I just can't imagine somebody, doing something like that. In the latter part of chapter 2, it comes in and it says that Job had 3 friends that came to see him. So in chapter 2, verse 11, it says, when 3 of Job's friends heard of the tragedy he had suffered, they got together and traveled from their homes to comfort and console him. When they saw Job from a distance, they scarcely recognized him. Wailing loudly, they tore their robes, threw dust in the air over their heads to show their grief, in which that was something that was very common in that time for you to express sorrow. So that was typically what they did. Then it says, then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and nights, and no one said a word to Job, for they saw that his suffering was too great for words. In chapter 3, it goes on, and if you get a chance, read chapter 3. It's a lot of stuff in there that just speaks to you about Job. But in verse 25 in chapter 3, it says, what I've always feared has happened to me. What I dreaded has come true. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, only trouble comes. So that just told me what kind of mindset he was in. And later on, we read that and there was a lot of things that his friends started doing that were not necessarily right. They were trying to convince him. For that, I just want to point out some of the things that I thought that they did that was right, and what we can learn from that today. The first thing was somehow they found out that Job was going through this trial. He didn't have Facebook back then, so I'm pretty sure that they didn't get a notification on Facebook that their friend was suffering. So somehow there was word. I don't know if it got to him. I don't know if that was from a messenger or how exactly that happened, but they got word, and they weren't too wrapped up in their own business or their own lives to be disconnected from Job. And so, what I think we can learn here is, in order to help a friend, you have to know what's going on in their life. It is so easy in this day and age of the technology that we're surrounded with to think we're in touch with a friend. I talk usually every couple of weeks. I have a conversation and have to remind people that when we look on Facebook or we look on Twitter, all we're seeing is the perfect part of somebody's life. We're not seeing the reality of when things aren't right. They're not seeing at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night your daughter's coming in and slamming the door because you made her come home and she wanted to be with her friends. We don't put that on Facebook. But we put all the positive stuff, so we're constantly, thinking we know what's going on with somebody. In actuality, we don't. So the first thing was, in order to help a friend, I think you have to know what's going on in their life, and that was what his friends showed there. The second thing is when they found out, they got on the road. Job's friends traveled to meet him. They could have stayed home and prayed for their friend. Instead, they sacrificed. And I look at, compared to what they had as modes of transportation and what we have today, how much more of a sacrifice it probably would have been for me. That, like I say, it might have not been a big deal for them to jump on a camel or walk, whatever the distance was. But, you got to think that they traveled, they spent their own money, to come from their homelands to be with Job. So sometimes you have to sacrifice for your friends in the time of need. You have to put things down, and you have to do things that you wouldn't normally be planning on doing. Then, the other thing I thought about was there was 3 of them. And how many times in life that you get 3 people together, you can't work something out. But they didn't have a problem with working out. They made an appointment to come together and to mourn with him. And they do that. They reached out. They coordinated it. I want to say that I would hope that we could do that among friends. We could coordinate stuff and move on. But it seems like to me from reading, through those scriptures that they didn't, fight and bicker over, who was going to drive, what they were going to eat on the trip, where they were going to stop. There wasn't anything like that said. It just says they came together. So as soon as they figured it out, they made that decision to go help their hurting friends. So that's a lesson that we can learn from them. Don't bicker over it. Figure out how to do it. Make it happen. The next thing that I saw was, they didn't overdo anything when they got there. The Bible tells us that when they saw Jacob, they couldn't recognize him. They lifted up their voices and wept for their friend. And so we see that Job's friends in this situation, that they see it for what it is. They're deeply grieving for him, and they express the right emotion in the right way. They didn't show up and said, "Hey, Job, we need to get you out of this tent and let's go have a party. We need to get you away from this." They didn't do that. So many times we show up and we want to solve the problem immediately for somebody. And we need to learn, and this is the next lesson I thought we could learn from, we need to be able to express emotion that's equal to the circumstances. When somebody's in dire straits like Job was, they made a right decision in not overexpressing emotion or coming in and trying to save the day or riding in on a horse and with their armor and trying to take care of the situation. So then I think that they showed the solidarity they had with Job. Ancient tradition dictated that in order to express grief and sorrow, you were to tear your clothes and put dust and ashes on your head. And, if you remember, Job had done that when he had received the devastating news of losing everything. Now his friends were there, and they were doing the same. Each of them, tore their robes and put dust on their head, and they were unified, with the Job in spirit and in appearance with their friend. So I think we need to find ways that we can identify and connect with those in pain. The next thing we go through, it says they didn't come in and leave their friend. They stayed with him and sat with him in silence for 7 days and 7 nights. They sat down on the ground and they're with him, for all that time. And I looked at that and I said, the lesson we can learn from that is friends in pain may need you for more than one day. And, so many times it's so easy for, us to go make a little quick trip to the hospital and see somebody and visit them, and you walk out and you feel like that we've done our part. And sometimes people need to see us more than that. Sometimes people, have friends that may be going through some trial in their life and dealing with a loss. They may need you more than that one time. So don't have the philosophy that just because you go and see somebody one time, that's all that they need. The next thing is, they didn't force words upon Jacob. To me, that oddest part of that whole story is them sitting there for 7 days and 7 nights, and they don't speak at all. For me, I love to talk to people, and I can't imagine doing that. And I thought about, sometimes our first inclination is to, say something to try to make the situation better. Those friends recognized that Job was not ready to communicate in any way. They could see the pain and the anguish he was in. So they just sat there with him and expressed their sympathy in silence. So the lesson is sometimes you don't have to say anything. Being there with somebody is enough. I've really just personally tried to focus on I used to say, man, I know what you feel. I know what you're going through. And I had no clue what people were going through, but yet I was throwing that out there like I did. Now I honestly tell people, man, I have no clue what you're going through. I've never been through that. But, I love you. I'll be praying for you. I'll check on you. If you need me before I check back on you, call me. And I sincerely mean that when I tell them that. So, sometimes you just have to remember you don't have to say something, or if you say something, it just needs to be something, I think, made in a general statement. Like I say, I'm not preaching at anybody on this. This is things that I deal with, and continue to deal with, that I'm trying to be better at. So let me, Julie, would you end us in prayer, and then we'll have a discussion?
Certainly. Lord Jesus, we come together today in your name, and I thank you for the fellowship and the love of all on this call. I pray, Lord, that you would help us to receive what our friends are going through. Help us sometimes to not even say a word, but just to be there. Lord, I pray that you would give each and every one of us an understanding, the ability to empathize rather than sympathize. And we do all of this in your name. Amen.